This is a recording of a presentation by Equilibrium Research for the World Wilderness Congress, Wild 12, in August, and the Global Grasslands and Savannah Dialogue Platform in November of 2024. I'm Hannah Timmins, and I'll be outlining the critical role of wildlife in maintaining grasslands and savannas. So first off, we should start with why grasslands and savannas are so important. They're often an overlooked biome. When we think about conservation of habitats, we tend to think about coral reefs or rainforests, and grasslands are often looked down on as wasted space, ripe for conversion to crops or plantations, and only fit for grazing a few livestock. But natural grasslands are a rich and irreplaceable source of ecosystem services, playing a critical role in food security and human livelihoods and culture. Failure to recognise this has led to them being undervalued. The grassland biome provides most of humanity's food, albeit at a considerable cost to other ecosystem services. The grasslands used in rangelands for livestock grazing amount to a massive quarter of all ice-free land. They're an important source of crop wild relatives, ensuring global agricultural systems, and many people are reliant on grasslands for other sources of food, such as plants and bushmeat. Grasslands are also an important source of medicinal plants and nectar for pollinators. They protect water resources and prevent soil erosion. And lastly, whilst carbon in grasslands and savannas is generally lower than in forests, it is globally important due to the huge areas involved. And grassland carbon may also be safer in areas of high fire risks than forest carbon, as the majority of grassland carbon is stored safely underground in roots and soil. So now we know that grasslands are critical for providing us with ecosystem services. But grassland biodiversity is equally critical for preserving those grasslands and providing those services. We often talk about protecting ecosystems to preserve wildlife, as if wildlife is a nice to have, rather than an intrinsic component of those natural systems. In WWF's Nature's Technicians report, we tried to flip the conventional wisdom of preserving habitat to protect wildlife on its head, and instead ask the question, what are the roles of wildlife in maintaining habitats and ecosystems and providing nature-based solutions to people? We did this by breaking the roles of wildlife down into a number of guilds, such as seed dispersers, pollinators, predators, soil engineers, nutrient arteries, etc. We found that as we are losing these species, we are making the structure of ecosystems or the biosphere as a whole more and more unstable. We are also losing essential services, and people are having to compensate for the loss of these services by creating more expensive human infrastructure as a substitute. So in terms of the role of wildlife in maintaining grasslands, one guild stands out for its keystone role, the grazers and browsers. Grasslands and grazers have co-evolved together. Their interactions and life cycles are interdependent and inextricable. For example, migratory megafauna grazers, i.e. animals over 45 kilos, modify grasslands through their intense, irregular and ever-shifting herbivory, creating mosaic ecosystems with a diversity of microhabitats. Large grazers like bison often prefer the ends of grasses, stimulating growth and ensuring that grasses are young and green. Browsers are persistently removing woody vegetation, ensuring that grasslands do not convert into forests. Of course, if we add predators into this mix, we will see browsers and grazers moving around a lot more and staying away from areas of low visibility, those so-called landscapes of fear, where vegetation often grows taller and thicker. Browsers and grazers also convert above-ground biomass, the carbon stored in grass and stems and leaves, into soil organic carbon through their dung. Again, this creates safer carbon stores in grasslands by decreasing fuel loads and reducing the frequency and intensity of fires. This process pushes carbon into the earth along with key nutrients like phosphorus, again, keeping the grasslands healthier. A really great example of grazers and carbon relationships is that of wildebeest of the Serengeti. Historically, the pathogen rinderpest, passed from cattle to wildlife, kept wildebeest populations unnaturally low. But when rinderpest was eradicated in the 1960s, wildebeest populations started to bounce back. As they returned, fire prevalence in the Serengeti dropped off because of the removal of dry fuel loads by wildebeest herbivory. The restoration of the wildebeest shifted the entire Serengeti ecosystem from being a carbon source into a carbon sink over just a few decades, and now the ecosystem absorbs several million tons of carbon dioxide each year. We can also think about these guilds, the browsers and grazers, the prey, the predators that hunt them, the scavengers and the detritivores, as nutrient arteries across massive continental landscapes. In grasslands, this is sometimes referred to as the green wave. As herbivores migrate through the landscapes, you have a green wave that flourishes behind them. We used to think that herbivores would be following the green grasses across the landscape. In actual fact, they have just as much to do with generating green grasses as they have to do with following them. This is because grasslands are often phosphorus and nitrogen limited, and migrations, particularly that of bison in the Great Plains, are happening from areas of high nutrient concentrations to areas of low nutrient concentrations. Across these continental areas, we can see populations of herbivores bringing with them nutrients in their dung, their urine, in their afterbirth, and in their bodies as carcasses being scavenged upon, and any other deposits they make. Of course, healthy grasslands are less vulnerable to climate instability, so restoring these migrations could be a major factor in climate resilience too. And Indigenous peoples have known about these green waves for millennia and have followed the migratory herds, not just for the meat, but also for the different edible and medicinal plants that they knew would be growing in the green shadow of the herds. But large herbivores are facing unprecedented risks right now. Their populations have faced huge declines and range contractions globally, and 60% of large herbivores are now faced with extinction. This is causing worldwide destabilization of grassland nitrogen and below-ground carbon stocks. These changes are not only leading to increased fire prevalence, but also an increase in invasive plant species and a reduction in grass and shrub richness and diversity. So again, browsers and grazers underpinning all these components of healthy grasslands. In many places around the world, groups, NGOs, projects are aiming to restore grasslands using fauna. The long-lost mammoth may still be some way off, but restoring the mammoth steppe might be possible. One project is aiming to use reintroduced bison and horse herds to open up woody vegetation that is encroached on these historical grasslands and improve their nutrient and carbon cycling. The restoration of these herds could also protect 80% of the carbon-rich permafrost in the steppe from thawing, reducing the emissions of carbon trapped within the permafrost. It has been calculated that restoring the American bison herds across the northern Great Plains could significantly increase carbon dioxide uptake through increasing grassland below-ground carbon. And in Romania, a group of Yale scientists have recently projected the carbon benefits of 170 reintroduced European bison to the Taku Mountains. Across a 50-kilometre square grassland, the Yale scientists have found that the herd could increase carbon capture and storage by almost 10 times. A huge portion of the world's grasslands are grazed by livestock, and whilst this is currently one of the main economic benefits of grasslands for people, we should ask whether livestock perform the same services in maintaining grassland health as wild herbivores do, and under what conditions. This is a huge question and probably requires a whole separate analysis, but for now suffice to say that livestock is a partial replacement under certain conditions, but there are major gaps. Particularly old breeds of cattle can fulfill some of the grazing roles, creating mosaic-like habitats. However, in some areas, inappropriate livestock species can significantly damage wild habitat, and legislation and cultural livestock management can also have impacts on ecosystems. For example, if they are fenced, which in many cases livestock are, they cannot act as the nutrient arteries across landscapes. Their mouthparts are often unlike wild herbivores that have evolved with plant species. So in particular ecosystems, certain livestock such as sheep can cause major damage to the grasslands by overgrazing and grazing grasses unselectively or too low on the base of the stem. In many countries, worming medications and the removal of livestock carcasses are a legal necessity. This means that nutrients from the carcasses are not able to get into the soil, and the worming medication can have devastating effects on wild invertebrates like dung beetle, which, we will find out soon, are a keystone force in soil health. In many parts of the world, we can often see livestock and pastoralists living happily alongside wild herbivores, but the predators might be missing from the ecosystem, frightened away by the presence of people. Without the predators, we lose the landscapes of fear and risk overgrazed grasslands. You may well have heard of landscapes of fear caused by predators before watching this video. A classic world-famous example is that of the wolves of Yellowstone. The presence of wolves causes some degree of permanent vigilance in the prey herbivores. Elk spend little time in steep valleys and other areas of low visibility and poor escape routes, and this leads to a return of woody vegetation and forests in these valleys, shading the rivers better, cooling the waters, and even leading to the return of certain fish species. There are many landscapes of fear mechanisms playing out in grasslands the world over, but one fascinating example can be found in Connecticut grasslands at the invertebrate level. Here, in the Yale-Myers forests, nursery web spiders take on the role of Yellowstone wolves, or more accurately, Yellowstone mountain lions. Like these big cats, the nursery web spiders are ambush predators, waiting in the tall grasses to drop down on their grasshopper prey. Like the Yellowstone elk, the grasshoppers are more vigilant and stressed when the spiders are present. Just like a student before a big exam, the grasshoppers stress-eat carb-rich foods instead of nitrogen-rich plants. As they do this, their bodies and excrement become nitrogen-poor, depositing less nitrogen into the soils. This reduced nitrogen slows woody encroachment and maintains grasslands over forest conversion. The effect of the spiders is so powerful that grasslands where they are present have a 40% increase in soil carbon retention compared to grasslands where the spiders are absent. We may never notice whether a spider is present in a grasslands, but the health and appearance of the ecosystem would be impacted dramatically. The last guild that we will look at in this video is the soil engineer. Of course, mammal migrations and the stampedes they create move soil. The movement of hundreds of thousands of hooves across a soil surface over a long distance can shift soils around, affect soil structure and vegetation growth. But there are also the true bioturbators, burrowing species that can move soils, nutrients, carbon, can create better aeration and water filtration deep into soils. These animals are essential for soil health, particularly for ecosystems like grasslands. For example, in North America, a single prairie dog burrow system can shift over 200 kilograms of soil per year, and prairie dog towns, each made of hundreds of these systems, can have huge collective impacts on the soil and water of the surrounding grasslands. The similar effects of termites is now known to increase nitrogen availability to plants, and dung beetles create these mini tunnelling systems through the earth that can increase water drainage by up to 30 times, whilst moving nutrients deep into the soils. Dung beetle impacts on water drainage are extremely valuable in areas where flooding is a regular problem for people. Our recommendations from this research are to protect and restore intact faunal assemblages. It is essential to have all these guilds present where they should be present: the soil engineers, the seed dispersers, the browsers and grazers, the predators and scavengers. It's essential to have all these components intact. But it is also important to have them present at an abundance at which their impacts are meaningful. If there is only one prairie dog town left in America's Great Plains, it will have a very limited effect on the soil health of the continent's grasslands. If the wildebeest herds are present but thinned out like they were during peak rinderpest epidemic of the 1960s, they will have a very weak effect on the carbon storage of the Serengeti grasslands. We need abundance, just like we need intact faunal assemblages. For our grasslands, this means that full ecological recovery will require the restoration of large wild herds moving over extensive, connected and diverse landscapes, and the preservation and restoration of all other guilds as well. And you can find out more about Nature's Technicians using the QR code here to access the full report, and we will also include a link in the post below. Thank you for watching.